The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark.
Glory to you, O Lord.
On leaving the synagogue, Jesus entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Simon's mother-in-law lay sick with a fever. They immediately told him about her. He approached, grasped her hand, and helped her up. Then the fever left her, and she waited on them. When it was evening, after sunset, they brought to him all who were ill and possessed by demons. The whole town was gathered at the door. He cured many who were sick with various diseases, and he drove out many demons, not permitting them to speak because they knew him. Rising very early before dawn, he left and went off to a deserted place where he prayed. Simon and those who were with him pursued him, and on finding him said, "Everyone is looking for you." He told them, "Let us go on the nearby villages, that I may preach there also. For this purpose have I come." So he went into their synagogues, preaching and driving out demons throughout the whole of Galilee. The Gospel of the Lord.
Say that there's two things that are guaranteed in life, death and taxes. I would add to that list, there's going to be some kind of suffering along the way. If you meet somebody who's managed to escape all suffering, physical, psychological, emotional, spiritual suffering, I would love to meet them and hear what heaven on earth has been like for them. But I don't know anybody like that. Job, from our first reading, is a story that's all about suffering. We hear Job talking about his life just in a little snapshot from this one passage. Life is a drudgery. He feels like a slave. He has these troubled, restless nights. His conclusion is, I shall not see happiness again. You can tell that he's been plunged deep into a depression that he doesn't feel like he's ever going to escape. He even puts it this way, "So I have been assigned months of misery." You ever hear people say something like, I've heard this a lot, is when somebody's going through something difficult, something along the lines of, I don't know what I did to deserve this, whatever this suffering that they might be enduring at that time. Or, why did God give this to me? Those are big questions. And I'm not here to, revile anyone who's asked those questions. If God is all-powerful, and we stop there, and we don't think about the all-loving, all-knowing part, and we just are looking at my suffering, and it seems unexplainable where it came from, sometimes it's easier just to put it on God. Say, well, God must have done this or given this to me somehow. And I don't think it's even on purpose. I don't think people are trying to do it out of a kind of faithless doubt. But it does show, so if we just go back to the beginning of the book of Job, the one who caused all Job's suffering is the devil. It's not God. Inside of those questions is an interior logic that implies something that we don't hold to be true as Christians. Right? Inside of the questions, what did I do to deserve this? Or why did God give this to me? Is this idea that God is the arbiter of suffering, and God is the one that deals out suffering to us. And that sometimes he does it to get even with us because we, quote unquote, did something to deserve it. That might follow logically, but we don't believe it to be true. What does God say about himself? What has he revealed to us? The psalm talks about how the Lord is good and gracious, that he is one who rebuilds and gathers in those who have been dispersed. Most of all, that he heals the brokenhearted, not that he breaks people's hearts. You know, the other thing I think, right, if we have to ask the question, right, is God the arbitrator of suffering, or is he who he says he is? Right? Arbitrator of suffering kind of has this idea that there's this mountain of suffering, and he's got to spread it around somehow. So, you know, well, you're going to get in a car accident, you're going to have cancer, and someone that you love is going to die, and you're going to get fired from your job, and you're going to be affected by the pandemic in a most extreme way, and so on and so forth. I get that people have thought that way for a long time, and I'm not here to judge you for having had any of those thoughts. And I want to tell you, I don't believe any of that's true. And the church and the scriptures don't believe that any of that's true. Where is God in the midst of our sufferings? Who does God say that he is in these situations? We have only to look at what God has done with his actions. We don't even have to look at his words. We talked about the psalm a minute ago. Remember that God became one of us, knowing full well how much suffering is involved with being human. And he suffered in the most extreme way, knowing full well that he would endure his passion out of sheer goodness and love for us, and out of a desperation for us to know that he is with us in the midst of our most terrible sufferings. He came down and took the cross upon himself for our sake. What does he have to gain for himself in this? What does Jesus gain from leaving heaven to come to earth? Who's better company, the Father and the Holy Spirit, or us sinners? Right? Now, he loves us. Right? It's not, no one put a gun to Jesus' back and said, you have to go and do this. Right? Chose it. He chose it freely, willingly. Like, that's an incredible love. Right? Came down to us, he endured his suffering on the cross. Right? Jesus is a good shepherd who lays down his life for his sheep. No greater love has a man than this, than to lay down his life for his friends. Right? These are the words of Jesus, but they aren't empty words. He backs it up with his whole life. Today we're welcomed to enter into that mystery of his own suffering and death. To one beautiful way that we can connect with Jesus in the Holy Eucharist, right? This is being presented to us again, this one mystery of his one sacrifice that happened once in history, but is an eternal mystery of the suffering of the heart of God. Anybody who truly knows love absolutely knows suffering. Because the one that they love, they know what it's like when that person doesn't love them back. They know what it's like when something bad is going on in that person's life and they're powerless in the face of it and can't fix it. There's an eternal suffering in the heart of God because he loves us infinitely and perfectly. We don't always love him back so well. Right? We don't always bring ourselves to our divine physician saying, I'm going to let you fix me. We say, I'm going to figure this out on my own. Parents know this kind of suffering. And they're like, I could spare you the trouble. But the kid says, I got it, Dad. Don't worry about it. I know what I'm doing. Good luck, son. Bring your sufferings to Jesus today. There's nothing fun about the suffering. But when it's united to Jesus, it at least takes on meaning. It at least takes on purpose. It at least now has redemptive value because his suffering is worth something that can redeem the world. And he leaves room enough for us to participate in his suffering by uniting our sufferings to his. Right? You're welcome, you are free to suffer on your own in isolation And that can be very tempting, because sometimes when suffering is intimately linked with vulnerability. We don't like admitting our weakness. We don't like admitting the places where we can be hurt. But wake up, you're vulnerable. You have weaknesses. You have vulnerabilities. You can be hurt. Ground yourself in reality and recognize those things and stop pretending that they're not there. Allow yourself to get past the anger, right? That's part of where this thinking of like, why did God give this to me? Is we need somebody to be angry at, because anger is easier to feel than suffering. It's easier to feel than vulnerability or pain or weakness. And so we go, well, I'm going to choose anger and I'm going to put it on God because I don't know who else to put it on. I can't point my, or who caused my immediate suffering? I'll find somebody and I'll point all my arrows at that one person. I remember early on in the situation in my life that caused a lot of pain was my parents split up. I needed somebody to be angry at. At that point, I had a pretty good prayer life. And so I knew God wasn't asking them to do this. But for me, I needed a single target, and I focused in hard on my dad, and dad was public enemy number one. It took me time to realize, like, it takes two to tango, and things happen, and my parents aren't perfect, and I love them both, and my relationship with each of them has been greatly healed and redeemed. But I know what it's like to be in that place where it's like, all right, you're going to be the one that I blame. I urge you. I want to beg you on behalf of Jesus. Don't point all your arrows at him. Some of you might be sitting here going, well, I'm still coming around, but I'm still angry. Listen, it's not to judge you for your anger. You're allowed to feel angry. But for the love of God, talk to him about your anger. Bring it to him. Right? He's a big boy, and he can take it. Say what you need to say. Get it off your chest, because you're not going to scare him off. He's not so easily offended as we are. And allow him to get that anger stuff out of the way so that you can press into those places where what you really need is that perfect, infinite, divine love. Let's prepare our hearts and search ourselves this morning for what it is that we need to lay on the altar and where we need him to encounter us in our lives today.